The Book of Thoth, by Aleister Crowley. The Theory of the Tarot. The contents of the tarot. The tarot constitutes a deck comprising 78 cards. There exist 4 suits akin to modern playing cards which are derived therefrom. However, the court cards comprise 4 rather than 3. Furthermore, there are 22 cards designated as trumps, each constituting a symbolic image possessing a distinct title. Upon initial inspection, one might presume this arrangement to be arbitrary. Yet it is not. It is mandated, as shall become evident subsequently, by the structure of the universe, and specifically that of the solar system, as symbolized by the Holy Cabala. This shall be elucidated in due course. The origin of the tarot. The origin of this deck of cards is shrouded in obscurity. Certain authorities attempt to trace it back as far as the ancient Egyptian mysteries, whereas others endeavor to advance its date to the 15th or even the 16th century. However, the tarot certainly existed in what may be termed the classical form, as early as the 14th century. For decks from that era are extant, and the form has not varied in any significant respect since that time. During the Middle Ages, these cards were frequently utilized for divination, particularly by gypsies, such that it became customary to speak of the tarot of the Bohemians or Egyptians. When it was discovered that the gypsies, despite the etymology, were of Asiatic origin, certain individuals attempted to locate its source in Indian art and literature. There is here no necessity to engage in any disputation regarding these contested points. The theory of the correspondences of the tarot. Tradition and authority are immaterial to the present purpose. Einstein's theory of relativity does not rely upon the fact that, when his theory was subjected to empirical testing, it received confirmation. The only theory of ultimate interest concerning the tarot is that it constitutes an admirable symbolic representation of the universe, based upon the data of the Holy Cabala. It will be appropriate later in this essay to describe the Holy Cabala in considerable detail and to discuss relevant particulars. The portion of it relevant here is termed Gematria, a science wherein the numerical value of a Hebrew word, each letter serving also as a number, links that word with others of identical value, or a multiple thereof. For instance, ACHD unity 1 plus 8 plus 4 equals 13, and AHBH, love 1 plus 5 plus 2 plus 5 is equal to 13. This fact is held to indicate that the nature of unity is love. Furthermore, IHVH Jehovah 10 plus 5 plus 6 plus 5 equals 26 equals 2 times 13. Therefore, Jehovah is unity manifested in duality, etc. One significant interpretation of the tarot is that it acts as a notaricon of the Hebrew Torah, the law, also of Throa, the gate. Now, by the Yetziratic attributions, see the table at the end. This word may be read as the universe, the newborn sun, 0. This constitutes the true magical doctrine of Thelema. 0 equals 2. Furthermore, by Gematria, the numerical value of Throa is 671 is equal to 61 times 11. Now 61 is AIN, nothing or 0, and 11 is the number of magical expansion. In this manner also, therefore, Throa announces that same dogma, the only satisfactory philosophical explanation of the cosmos, its origin, mode, and objective. Absolute mystery shrouds the question of the origin of this system. Any theory that satisfies the facts demands assumptions that are thoroughly absurd. To explain it at all, one must postulate in the obscure past a fantastic assembly of learned rabbis who solemnly calculated all manners of combinations of letters and numbers, and created the Hebrew language upon this series of manipulations. This theory is patently contrary not only to common sense but to the facts of history and to all that we know regarding the formation of language. Nevertheless, the evidence is equally compelling that there exists something, not merely a trifle but a vast amount, something that excludes all reasonable theories of coincidence in the correspondence between words and numbers. It is an undeniable fact that any given number is not merely one integer greater than the predecessor and one less than the successor, but is an independent individual idea, a thing in itself, a spiritual, moral, and intellectual substance, not only as much as, but a great deal more than any human being. Its merely mathematical relations are indeed the laws of its existence, yet they do not constitute the number, any more than the chemical and physical laws of reaction in the human anatomy provide a complete depiction of a man. The evidence for the initiated tradition of the tarot. Eliphas Levi and the tarot. Although the origins of the tarot are entirely obscure, there exists a very interesting piece of quite modern history. History well within the memory of living man, which is extremely significant and will be found, as the thesis develops, to sustain it in a very remarkable manner. In the middle of the 19th century, there arose a preeminent cabalist and scholar, who still vexes dull individuals by his habit of amusing himself at their expense by making fools of them posthumously. His name was Alphonse Louis Constant, and he was an abbé of the Roman Church. For his pseudonym, he translated his name into Hebrew Eliphas Levi Zahed, and he is very generally known as Eliphas Levi. Eliphas Levi was a philosopher and an artist, besides being a supreme literary stylist and a practical joker of the variety called deadpan, and, being an artist and a profound symbolist, he was immensely attracted by the tarot. While in England, he proposed to Kenneth Mackenzie, a renowned occult scholar and high-grade Freemason, to reconstitute and issue a scientifically designed deck. In his works are new presentations by him of the trumps called the Chariot and the Devil. He appears to have understood that the tarot was actually a pictorial form of the Kabbalistic tree of life, which is the basis of the entire Kabbalah, so much so that he composed his works upon this foundation. He wished to write a complete treatise on magic. He divided his subject into two parts, theory and practice, which he called dogma and ritual. Each part possesses 22 chapters, one for each of the 22 trumps, and each chapter deals with the subject represented by the picture displayed by the trump. The importance of the accuracy of the correspondence will appear in due course. Here we encounter a slight complication. The chapters correspond, yet they correspond incorrectly, and this is only to be explained by the fact that Levi felt himself bound by his original oath of secrecy to the order of initiates which had entrusted him with the secrets of the tarot. The tarot in the Cipher manuscripts. At the time of the French Renaissance of the 1850s, a similar movement took place in England. Its interest centered in ancient religions and their traditions of initiation and thaumaturgy. Learned societies, some secret or semi-secret, were founded or revived. Among the members of one such group, the Quatuor Coronati Lodge of Freemasonry, were three men. 1. Dr. Wynne Westcott, a London coroner, a Dr. Woodford, and a Dr. Woodman. There is a minor dispute as to which of these men went to the Farringdon Road, or whether it was the Farringdon Road to which they went, but there is no doubt whatever that one of them purchased an old book, either from an obscure bookseller or from a market barrow, or discovered it in a library. This occurred about 1884 or 1885. There is no dispute that in this book were some loose folios, that these papers proved to be written in cipher, that these cipher manuscripts contain the material for the foundation of a secret society purporting to confer initiation by means of ritual, and that among these manuscripts was an attribution of the trumps of the tarot to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. When this matter is examined, it becomes quite evident that Levi's erroneous attribution of the letters was deliberate, that he knew the correct attribution and considered it his duty to conceal it. It caused him considerable difficulty to camouflage his chapters. The cipher manuscripts were alleged to date from the earliest years of the 19th century, and there exists a marginal annotation on one page which appears to be in the handwriting of Eliphas Levi. It seems highly probable that he gained access to this manuscript during his visit to Bulwer Lytton in England. In any event, as previously observed, Levi consistently demonstrates knowledge of the correct attributions, with the exception, naturally, of tzadi, the reason for which shall be elucidated later, and he endeavored to utilize them without improperly revealing secrets he was sworn to withhold. The moment one possesses the true attributions of these trumps, the tarot becomes animated with vitality. One is intellectually overwhelmed by the inherent rectitude of the system. All difficulties created by the traditional attributions, as understood by the ordinary scholar, vanish predominantly in an instant. For this reason, one is inclined to credit the claim of the promulgators of the cipher manuscript, that they were indeed guardians of a tradition of truth, the tarot and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. It is now necessary to digress into the history of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the society reconstituted by Dr. Westcott and his colleagues, to provide further evidence regarding the authenticity of the claims made by the promulgators of the cipher manuscript. Among these papers, in addition to the attribution of the tarot, were certain skeletal rituals purporting to contain the secrets of initiation. Furthermore, the name of a Miss Sprengel with an address in Germany was mentioned as the issuing authority. Dr. Westcott wrote to her, and, with her permission, the Order of the Golden Dawn was founded in 1886. The genius who facilitated this was a man named Samuel Liddell Mathers. After a time, Miss Sprengel died. A letter written to her, soliciting more advanced knowledge, elicited a reply from one of her colleagues. This letter informed Dr. Westcott of her death, adding that the writer and his associates had never approved of Miss Sprengel's action in authorizing any form of group working, but, in view of the great reverence and esteem in which she was held, they had refrained from open opposition. He proceeded to state that this correspondence must now cease, but that if the members desired more advanced knowledge, they could perfectly well obtain it by utilizing, in the proper manner, the knowledge they already possessed. In other words, they were instructed to utilize their magical powers to establish contact with the secret chiefs of the order. This, incidentally, constitutes a quite normal and traditional mode of procedure. Shortly thereafter, Mathers, who had maneuvered himself into the de facto headship of the order, announced that he had established this link, and that the secret chiefs had authorized him to continue the work of the order as its sole head. There is, however, no evidence that he was a witness of truth in this instance, because no new knowledge of any particular importance came to the order. Such knowledge as did appear proved to be no more than what Mathers could have acquired by normal means from quite accessible sources, such as the British Museum. These circumstances, combined with a great deal of petty intrigue, led to serious dissatisfaction among the members of the order. Miss Sprengel's judgment, that group working in an order of this variety is possible, was shown in this case to be erroneous. In 1900, the order in its existing form was destroyed. The purpose of these data is simply to demonstrate that, at that time, The primary preoccupation of all serious members of the order was to establish contact with the secret chiefs themselves. In 1904, success was attained by one of the youngest members, Frater Perdurabo. The fullest details of this occurrence are provided in the Equinox of the Gods. It is not useful here to discuss the evidence establishing the truth of this claim. However, it must be observed that it is internal evidence. It exists within the manuscript itself. It would make no difference if the statement of any of the persons concerned proved to be false. The nature of the evidence. These historical digressions have been essential to the understanding of the conditions of this inquiry. It is now appropriate to consider the peculiar numbering of the trumps. It appears natural to a mathematician to commence the series of natural numbers with 0, yet this is very disturbing to the non-mathematically trained mind. In the traditional essays and books on the tarot, the card numbered 0 was supposed to lie between the cards 20 and 21. The secret of the initiated interpretation, which renders the entire meaning of the trumps luminous, is simply to restore this card marked 0 to its natural place, where any mathematician would have positioned it, preceding the number 1. However, there remains one peculiarity, one disturbance in the natural sequence. This is that the cards 8 and 11 must be counterchanged in order to preserve the attribution. For the card 6 is called Strength. On it appears a lion, and it quite evidently refers to the zodiacal sign Leo, whereas the card 8 is called Justice and represents the conventional symbolic figure, throned with sword and balances, thus obviously referring to the zodiacal sign of Libra, the balance. Frater Perdurabo had conducted a very profound study of the tarot since his initiation into the order on the 18th of November 1898. For 3 months later, he had attained the grade of practicus, and as such, he became entitled to know the secret attribution. He constantly studied this and the accompanying explanatory manuscripts. He verified all these attributes of the numbers to the forms of nature and found nothing incongruous. But when he was transcribing the book of the law from the dictation of the messenger of the secret chiefs, he seems to have posed a mental question, suggested by the words in chapter 1, verse 57, the law of the fortress and the great mystery of the house of God being one name of the tarot trump numbered 16. The question was to this effect: have I got these attributions right? For there came an interpolated answer: all these old letters of my book are aright, but Sadi is not the star. This also is secret. My prophet shall reveal it to the wise. This was exceedingly vexatious. If Sadi was not the star, what was? And what was Sadi? He endeavored for years to counterchange this card, the star which is numbered 17, with some other. He had no success. It was many years later that the solution occurred to him. Sadi is the emperor, and therefore the positions of 17 and 4 must be counterchanged. This attribution is highly satisfactory. Yes, but it is something a great deal more than satisfactory. It is, to clear thought, the most convincing evidence possible that the book of the law is a genuine message from the secret chiefs. For the star is referred to Aquarius in the zodiac, and the emperor to Aries. Now, Aries and Aquarius are situated on each side of Pisces, just as Leo and Libra are on each side of Virgo. That is to say, the correction in the book of the law provides a perfect symmetry in the zodiacal attribution, exactly as if a loop were formed at one end of the ellipse to correspond precisely with the existing loop at the other end. These matters sound rather technical. In fact, they are. However, the more one studies the tarot, the more one perceives the admirable symmetry and perfection of the symbolism. Yet, even to the layman, it ought to be evident that balance and fitness are essential to any perfection, and the elucidation of these two tangles in the last 150 years is undoubtedly a very remarkable phenomenon. Summary of the questions hitherto discussed. 1. The origin of the tarot is quite irrelevant, even if it were certain. It must stand or fall as a system on its own merits. 2. It is beyond doubt a deliberate attempt to represent, in pictorial form, the doctrines of the Kabbalah. 3. The evidence for this is very much akin to the evidence brought forward by a person solving a crossword puzzle. He knows from the across clues that his word is SERUN blank H. Thus, it is certain beyond error that the blank must be SC. 4. These attributions are, in one sense, a conventional and symbolic map. Such a system could be devised by an individual or group possessing profound artistic imagination and ingenuity, combined with scholarship and philosophical clarity of an almost inconceivable magnitude. 5. Yet such individuals, however eminent we may suppose them to have been, would not be entirely capable of constructing a system of such comprehensive abstruseness without the assistance of superiors whose mental processes pertained, or pertain, to a higher dimension. One might consider, by way of an analogy, the game of chess. Chess developed from very humble beginnings. It was a mimic battle for weary warriors, but the subtleties of the modern game, which have now, thanks to Richard Reddy, transcended mere calculation to enter the realm of aesthetic creation, were latent within the original design. The originators of the game built better than they realized. It is, of course, possible to argue that these subtleties arose during the course of the game's development. Indeed, it is quite clear, historically, that the early players whose games are on record had no conscious conception of anything beyond a variety of rather crude and elementary stratagems. It is quite possible to argue that the game of chess is merely one of a number of games that developed while others perished due to some accident. One can argue that it is merely by chance that modern chess was latent in the original game. However, the theory of inspiration is truly far simpler, and it accounts for the facts without violation of the law of parsimony. The Tarot and the Holy Kabbalah. The next subject of inquiry is the Holy Kabbalah. This is a very straightforward subject and presents no difficulties to the ordinarily intelligent mind. There are 10 numbers in the decimal system, and there exists a genuine reason why there should be 10 numbers, and only 10 in a numerical system which is not merely mathematical but philosophical. It is necessary, at this juncture, to introduce the Naples arrangement. But first of all, one must comprehend the pictorial representation of the universe provided by the Holy Kabbalah. This image represents the tree of life, which is a map of the universe. One must commence, as a mathematician would, with the idea of zero, absolute zero, which, upon examination, signifies any quantity that one may choose, though not in the vulgar sense initially supposed by the layman. It is not nothing in the sense of a mere absence of anything. The Naples arrangement. The Kabbalists expanded upon this idea of nothing, deriving a second type of nothing which they called Ein Sof, without limit. This idea appears not unlike that of space. They subsequently determined that in order to interpret this mere absence of any means of definition, it was necessary to postulate the Ein Sof, or limitless light. By this, they appear to have intended something very similar to what late Victorian scientists meant, or believed they meant, by the luminiferous ether. All this is evidently without form and void. These are abstract conditions, not positive ideas. The next step must be the idea of position. One must formulate this thesis. If there is anything except nothing, it must exist within this boundless light, within this space, within this inconceivable nothingness, which cannot exist merely as nothingness but must be conceived as a nothingness composed of the annihilation of two imaginary opposites. Thus appears the point, which possesses neither parts nor magnitude, but only position. But position holds no meaning whatsoever unless there is something else, some other position with which it can be compared. One must describe it. The only way to do this is to have another point, and that necessitates the invention of the number 2, making possible the line. But this line does not really signify much, because there is as yet no measure of length. The limit of knowledge at this stage is that there are two things, enabling one to speak of them at all. But one cannot say that they are near each other, or that they are far apart. One can only say that they are distant. In order to discriminate between them at all, there must be a third entity. We must have another point. One must invent the surface. One must invent the triangle. In doing this, incidentally, the entirety of plane geometry appears. One can now say, A is nearer to B than A is to C. But, thus far, there is no substance in any of these ideas. In fact, there are no ideas at all except the idea of distance and perhaps the idea of betweenness and of angular measurement, so that plane geometry, which now exists in theory, is after all completely inchoate and incoherent. There has been no approach at all to the conception of a really existing entity. No more has been done than to make definitions, all in a purely ideal and imaginary world. Now then comes the abyss. One cannot go any further into the ideal. The next step must be the actual, or at least an approach to the actual. There are 3 points, but there is no idea of where any one of them is. A 4th point is essential, and this formulates the idea of matter. The point, the line, the plane. The 4th point, unless it should happen to lie in the plane, gives the solid. If one wants to know the position of any point, one must define it by the use of 3 coordinate axes. It is a specific number of feet from the north wall, a specific number of feet from the east wall, and a specific number of feet from the floor. Thus, from nothingness, a something has developed which can be said to exist. One has arrived at the idea of matter. But this existence is exceedingly tenuous, for the only property of any given point is its position in relation to certain other points. No change is possible, nothing can happen. One is therefore compelled, in the analysis of known reality, to postulate a 5th positive idea, which is that of motion. This implies the idea of time, for only through motion, and in time, can any event happen. Without this change and sequence, nothing can be the object of sense. It is to be noticed that this number 5 is the number of the letter He in the Hebrew alphabet. This is the letter traditionally consecrated to the Great Mother. It is the womb in which the Great Father, who is represented by the letter Yod, which is pictorially the representation of an ultimate point, moves and begets active existence. There is now possible a concrete idea of the point, and, at last, it is a point which can be self-conscious because it can have a past, present, and future. It is able to define itself in terms of the previous ideas. Here is the number 6, the center of the system, self-conscious, capable of experience. At this stage, it is convenient to turn away for a moment from the strictly Kabbalistic symbolism. The doctrine of the next 3 numbers, to some minds at least, is not very clearly expressed. One must look to the Vedanta system for a more lucid interpretation of the numbers 7, 8, and 9, although they correspond very closely with the Kabbalistic ideas. In the Hindu analysis of existence, the rishis, sages, postulate three qualities: Sat, the essence of being itself; Chit, thought or intellect ion; and Ananda, usually translated as bliss, the pleasure experienced by being in the course of events. This ecstasy is evidently the exciting cause of the mobility of existence. It explains the assumption of imperfection on the part of perfection. The absolute would be nothing and would remain in the condition of nothingness. Therefore, in order to be conscious of its possibilities and to enjoy them, it must explore these possibilities. One may here insert a parallel statement of this doctrine from the document called the Book of the Great Auk to enable the student to consider the position from the standpoint of two different minds. All elements must at one time have been separate. That would be the case with great heat. Upon the atoms reaching the sun, one encounters that immense, extreme thermal intensity, wherein all elements revert to their intrinsic selves. Postulate that each atom of every element retains the memory of all its vicissitudes while in combination. Parenthetically, that atom, fortified with memory, would not be identical to the original atom. Yet it remains so, for it has acquired nothing from any external source save for this memory. Consequently, through the lapse of time and by virtue of memory, a thing may evolve into something exceeding its original state. Thus, genuine development becomes possible. One may then discern a rationale for any element resolving to undergo this series of incarnations. For thus, and only thus, can it proceed, and it endures the lapse of memory attendant upon these incarnations because it knows it shall emerge unchanged. Therefore, one may posit an infinite number of gods, individual and equal though diverse, each one supreme and utterly indestructible. This also constitutes the sole explanation of how a being could fashion a world in which war, evil, and similar afflictions exist. Evil is merely a phenomenal appearance, for, like good, it cannot affect the substance itself, but only multiply its combinations. This bears resemblance to mystic monotheism. However, the objection to that hypothesis is that God is compelled to create entities that are merely portions of himself, rendering their interaction illusory. If one presupposes a multiplicity of elements, their interplay is natural. These concepts of being, thought, and bliss constitute the minimum requisite qualities a point must possess to achieve a genuine sensible experience of itself. These correlate with the numbers 9, 8, and 7. The primary concept of reality, as apprehended by the mind, is therefore to conceive of the point as constructed from these previous 9 successive developments from zero. Here, then, at last, is the number 10. In other words, to describe reality in the form of knowledge, one must postulate these 10 successive ideas. In the Kabbalah, they are termed Sephiroth, which signifies numbers. As shall be demonstrated subsequently, each number possesses its own significance, and each corresponds with all phenomena in such a manner that their arrangement in the tree of life, as depicted in the diagrams, constitutes a map of the universe. These 10 numbers are represented in the tarot by the 40 small cards. The tarot and the formula of tetragrammaton. What, then, is the nature of the court cards? This inquiry involves another aspect of the system of development. What constituted the primary mental process? Compelled to define nothingness, the sole method of doing so without violating its integrity was to depict it as the union of a positive something with an equivalent negative something. One may designate these two ideas as the active and passive, or the father and mother. However, although the father and mother may achieve a perfect union, thereby returning to zero, which constitutes a retrogression, They may also advance into matter, such that their union produces a son and a daughter. This concept functions in practice as a method of describing how the union of any two entities produces a third entity which is neither of the progenitors. The simplest illustration is found in chemistry. If one introduces an electric spark to a mixture of hydrogen and chlorine gases, an explosion ensues, and hydrochloric acid is produced. Here exists a positive substance, which may be termed the son of the marriage of these elements, representing an advance into matter. However, in the ecstasy of the union, light and heat are also released. These phenomena are not material in the equivalent sense that hydrochloric acid is material. This product of the union is therefore of a spiritual nature and corresponds to the daughter. In the nomenclature of the alchemists, these phenomena were classified for convenience under the figure of 4 elements. Fire, the purest and most active, corresponds to the father. Water, still pure yet passive, is the mother. Their union results in an element partaking of both natures, yet distinct from either, and this they termed air. One must constantly recall that the terms employed by ancient and medieval philosophers do not bear the meanings assigned to them in the modern era. To them, water does not signify the chemical compound H2O. It represents an intensely abstract concept existing ubiquitously. The ductility of iron is a watery quality. The word element does not denote a chemical element. It signifies a complex of ideas, summarizing certain qualities or properties. It appears scarcely possible to define these terms in a manner that renders their meaning lucid to the student. He must discover for himself, through constant practice, what they signify to him. It does not even follow that he will arrive at identical concepts. This does not imply that one mind is correct and the other in error, because each of us possesses his own universe entirely to himself, and it is not identical to the universe of any other. The moon perceived by observer A is not the moon perceived by observer B, who stands beside him. In this instance, the discrepancy is so infinitesimal that it does not exist in practice, yet a difference remains. However, if A and B view a painting in a gallery, it is decidedly not the same picture to both, because the mind of A has been trained to observe it through his experience of thousands of other paintings, whereas B has likely viewed an entirely different set of images. Their experience will coincide only regarding a few well-known pictures. Furthermore, their minds are essentially different in many other respects. Thus, if A dislikes Van Gogh, B pities him. If C admires Bouguereau, D exhibits indifference. There is no absolute right or wrong regarding any matter whatsoever. This holds true even in matters of the strictest science. The scientific description of an object is universally true, and yet it is not completely true for any single observer. The phenomenon termed the daughter is ambiguous. It has been elucidated above as the spiritual ingredient in the result of the marriage of the father and the mother, but this constitutes only one interpretation. The tarot and the elements. The ancients conceived of fire, water, and air as pure elements. They were connected with the 3 qualities of being, knowledge, and bliss previously mentioned. They also correspond with what the Hindus designated the 3 qualities, purity, passion, and inertia, concepts roughly translatable as calm, activity, and slothful darkness. The alchemists posited 3 similar principles of energy, of which all existing phenomena are composed: sulfur, mercury, and salt. This sulfur is activity, energy, and desire. Mercury is fluidity, intelligence, and the power of transmission. Salt is the vehicle of these two forms of energy, but itself possesses qualities which react upon them. The student must retain all these tripartite classifications in his mind. In certain instances, one set will prove more utilitarian than others. For the present, concentrate on the fire, water, and air series. These elements are represented in the Hebrew alphabet by the letters Shin, Mem, and Aleph. The Kabbalists term them the three mother letters. In this particular group, the three elements concerned are completely spiritual forms of pure energy. They can only manifest in sensible experience by impinging upon the senses, crystallizing out in a fourth element which they call earth, represented by the final letter of the alphabet, tau. This, then, represents another distinct interpretation of the idea of the daughter, which is here considered as a pendant to the triangle. It is the number 10 suspended from the 7, 8, and 9 in the diagram. These two interpretations must be held in mind simultaneously. The Kabbalists, in devising the tarot, then proceeded to create illustrations of these extremely abstract ideas of father, mother, son, and daughter, and they named them king, queen, prince, and princess. It is confusing, but they were also designated knight, queen, king, and princess. Occasionally, the prince and princess are also termed emperor and empress. The reason for this confusion lies within the doctrine of the Fool of the Tarot, the legendary wanderer who wins the king's daughter. This legend is inextricably linked to the ancient and profound stratagem of selecting a royal successor based upon his capacity to win the princess from all rivals. The Golden Bough by Fraser serves as the definitive authority upon this subject. For the current deck, it has been deemed preferable to adopt the nomenclature of knight, queen, prince, and princess to represent the series of father, mother, son, and daughter. This adaptation is necessitated by the extraordinarily complex and abstruse doctrine involved. The father acts as the knight, for he is depicted mounted upon a steed. It may provide greater clarity to describe the two primary systems, the Hebrew and the pagan, as though they were, and had always remained, concrete and distinct entities. The Hebrew system is linear and irreversible. It postulates a father and a mother from whose union issue a son and a daughter. There it concludes. Deriving the father-mother dyad from a manifest unity, and further seeking the source of that unity in nothingness, belongs to later philosophical speculation. This represents a concrete and limited schema, crude, characterized by a causeless beginning and a sterile end. The pagan system, conversely, is circular, self-generated, self-nourished, and self-renewed. It resembles a wheel upon whose rim represent father, mother, son, daughter. They revolve about the motionless axis of zero, uniting at will and transforming one into another. In this orbit, there is neither beginning nor end, nor is any station superior or inferior to another. The equation naught equals many equals 2 equals 1 equals all equals naught is implicit within every mode of the system's existence. Arduous though this concept may be, at least one highly desirable result has been achieved. It elucidates why the tarot possesses 4 court cards rather than 3. Furthermore, it explains the existence of the 4 suits. These suits are designated as follows. Wands, attributed to fire, cups, to water, swords, to air, and discs, coins, or pantacles, to earth. The student will observe this interplay and counterchange of the number 4. It is strictly significant to note that even within the tenfold arrangement, the number 4 plays its part. The tree of life may be divided into 4 planes. The number 1 corresponds to fire, numbers 2 and 3 to water, numbers 4 through 9 to air, and the number 10 to earth. This division correlates with the analysis of man. The number 1 represents his spiritual essence, devoid of quality or quantity. Numbers 2 and 3 represent his creative and transmissive powers, his virility and intelligence. Numbers 4 through 9 describe his mental and moral qualities as concentrated within his human personality. The number 6 is, so to speak, a concrete elaboration of the number 1, and the number 10 corresponds to Earth, the physical vehicle of the preceding 9 numbers. The nomenclature for these components of the soul is 1. Jeketa, 2 and 3, Kaya and Neskama, for through 9, Ruach, and finally 10, Nefesh. These 4 planes correspond once again to the so-called 4 worlds. To comprehend their nature, one should refer, with all due reservation, to the Platonic system. The number 1 is Atziluth, the archetypal world. However, the number 2, being the dynamic aspect of number 1, is the practical attribution. The number 3 is Bria, the creative world, wherein the will of the Father assumes form through the conception of the mother, just as the spermatozoon, by fertilizing the ovum, enables the production of an image of its parents. The numbers 4 through 9 comprise Yetzirah, the formative world, in which an intellectual image, an appreciable form of the idea, is produced. This mental image becomes real and sensible in the number 10, Asaya, the material world. It is only by navigating these confusing, and at times seemingly contradictory, attributions with unwearying patience and persistent energy that one eventually arrives at a lucid understanding, an understanding infinitely clearer than any intellectual interpretation could possibly offer. This constitutes a fundamental exercise in the path toward initiation. Were one a shallow rationalist, it would be quite facile to find flaws in all these attributions and semi-philosophical hypotheses or near-hypotheses. Yet, it is equally simple to prove via mathematics that it is impossible to strike a golf ball. Hitherto, the principal theme of this essay has been the tree of life, specifically the Sephiroth in their essence. It is now appropriate to consider the relations of the Sephiroth to one another. It will be noted that 22 lines are employed to complete the structure of the tree of life. It will be explained in due course how these correspond to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. One may remark that, in certain respects, the manner in which these are connected appears arbitrary. Notably, there exists an equilateral triangle, consisting of the numbers 1, 4, and 5, which one might surmise would form a natural basis for the operations of philosophy. Yet, there are no lines connecting 1 and 4 or 1 and 5. This is no accident. Nowhere in the figure does an erect equilateral triangle appear, although there are 3 equilateral triangles with their apices pointing downward. This results from the original formula of Father, Mother, Son, which is repeated 3 times in a descending scale of simplicity and spirituality. The number 1 stands above these triangles, for it is an integration of 0 and depends upon the triple veil of the negative. Now the Sephiroth, which are emanations of the number 1, as previously demonstrated, are things in themselves in almost the Kantian sense. The lines connecting them represent forces of nature of a much less complete type. They are less abstruse and less abstract. The 22 keys, ATU, or trumps of the tarot. Here, now, is an excellent example of the all-pervading doctrine of equilibrium. The equation always reads x2 plus bx plus x equals 0. If it does not equal 0, it is not an equation. Thus, whenever any symbol loses importance in one locus of the cabala, it gains significance in another. The court cards and the small cards form the skeletal structure of the tarot in its principal function as a map of the universe. However, regarding the specific significance of the deck as a key to magical formulas, the 22 trumps acquire a peculiar importance. To what symbols are they attributed? They cannot be related identically to any of the essential ideas, for that station is occupied by the cards numbered 1 through 10. Nor can they primarily represent the complex of father, mother, son, and daughter in its fullness, as the court cards have already assumed that position. They are attributed as follows. The 3 mother letters, Shin, Mem, and Aleph, represent the 3 active elements. The 7 so-called double letters, Beth, Gimel, Daleth, Kaf, Peh, Resh, and Tau, represent the 7 sacred planets. The remaining 12 letters, He, Vav, Zain, Cheth, Taith, Yod, Lamed, Nun, Samek, Ain, Sadi, and Kof, represent the signs of the zodiac. There exists a slight confluence or overlapping in this arrangement. The letter Shin must serve for both fire and spirit, much in the same manner as the number 2 partakes of the nature of the number 1. Likewise, the letter Tau represents both Saturn and the element of earth. Within these difficulties lies a doctrine. Yet one cannot dismiss these 22 letters so casually. The stone that the builders rejected becomes the head of the corner. These 22 cards acquire a personality of their own, a very curious personality. It would be entirely incorrect to assert that they represent a complete universe. Rather, they appear to represent certain distinct and curious phases of the universe. They do not seem to be essential factors in the cosmic structure, but change from time to time in their relation to current events. A glance at the list of their titles seems to indicate no longer the strictly philosophical and scientific spirit of austere classification found in the other cards. Instead, there leaps at us the language of the artist. The designations of these cards are the Fool, the Juggler, the High Priestess, the Empress, the Emperor, the Hierophant, the Lovers, the Chariot, Lust, the Wheel of Fortune, Adjustment, the Hanged Man, Death, Art, the Devil, the House of God, the Star, the Moon, the Sun, the Aeon, and the Universe. It is immediately apparent that these titles are not merely plain, straightforward symbolic representations of the associated signs, elements, and planets. Rather, they serve as hieroglyphs denoting the peculiar mysteries intrinsic to each. One might begin to suspect that the tarot differs from a purely objective depiction of the universe, such as the impersonal system found in the I Ching. Indeed, the tarot begins to assume the semblance of propaganda. It appears as though the secret chiefs of the Great Order, the guardians of the human race's destiny, intended to advance specific aspects of the universe, to establish particular doctrines, and to declare certain modes of operation suitable to the prevailing political conditions. In this respect, they differ as a literary composition differs from a lexicon. It is unfortunate, yet entirely unavoidable, that this exposition has necessitated such extensive argumentation and digression as a prelude to a direct description of the deck. A summary of the preceding statements may facilitate understanding. The following is a concise elucidation of the scheme of the Tree of Life. The numbers, or things in themselves, are 10 successive emanations from the triple veil of the negative. The small cards, numbered 1 to 10, correspond to the Sephiroth. These cards are presented in a fourfold manner, for they represent not the pure abstract numbers, but rather particular symbols of those numbers within the universe of manifestation, which is, for convenience, classified under the figure of the 4 elements. The court cards symbolize the elements themselves, with each element further subdivided into 4 sub-elements. For the sake of convenience, a list of these cards follows: Knight of Wands, Fire of Fire; Queen of Wands, Water of Fire; Prince of Wands, Air of Fire; Princess of Wands, Earth of Fire; Knight of Cups, Water of Fire; Queen of Cups, Water of Water; Prince of Cups, Air of Water; Princess of Cups, Earth of Water; Knight of Swords, Fire of Air; Queen of Swords, Water of Air; Prince of Swords, Air of Air; Princess of Swords, Earth of Air; Knight of Discs, Fire of Earth; Queen of Discs, Water of Earth; Prince of Discs, Air of Earth; Princess of Discs, Earth of Earth. The tarot trumps number 22. They represent the elements existing between the Sephiroth, or things in themselves, rendering their position on the tree of life significant. 2 examples shall suffice. The card titled The Lovers, whose secret designation is the children of the voice, the oracle of the mighty gods, bridges the number 3 and the number 6. The number 6 represents the human personality, while the number 3 symbolizes spiritual intuition. Consequently, it is both natural and significant that the influence of the 3 upon the 6 is that of the intuitional or inspirational voice. It is the illumination of the mind and heart by the Great Mother. Consider also the card connecting the number 1 to the number 6. This card is named the High Priestess and is attributed to the moon. It represents the heavenly Isis. It stands as a symbol of absolute spiritual purity. It is initiation in its most arcane and intimate form, descending upon human consciousness from the ultimate divine consciousness. Viewed from below, it constitutes the pure, unwavering aspiration of man toward the Godhead, his source. These matters shall be explored more fully when we treat each card individually. From the foregoing, it becomes evident that the tarot illustrates, primarily, the tree of life in its universal aspect, and secondarily, the specific commentary elucidating that phase of the tree of life which is of peculiar interest to those charged with the guardianship of the human race at the moment of a given authorized deck's production. It is, therefore, appropriate for these guardians to modify the appearance of the deck when they deem it beneficial. The traditional pack has itself undergone numerous modifications adopted for convenience. For instance, in medieval packs, the emperor and empress were explicitly associated with the Holy Roman Emperor and his consort. The card originally titled the Hierophant, representing Osiris, as indicated by the tiara's shape, was transformed during the Renaissance into the Pope. The High Priestess came to be known as Pope Joan, reflecting a certain symbolic legend circulating among initiates that was subsequently vulgarized into the fable of a female pope. Of even greater import, the angel or the Last Judgment represented the world's destruction by fire. Its hieroglyph is, in a sense, prophetic, for when the world was figuratively destroyed by fire on March 21, 1904, attention was inevitably drawn to the resemblance between this card and the Stele of Revealing. As this event marked the inception of the new aeon, it seemed more fitting to depict the beginning of the aeon. For all that is currently known regarding the subsequent aeon, due in 2000 years, is that its symbol is the one of the double wand. However, the new aeon has wrought such fantastic changes in the established order that retaining outworn traditions would be patently absurd. The rituals of the old time are black. Consequently, The present scribe has endeavored to preserve those essential features of the tarot that remain independent of the periodic changes of the aeon, while updating those dogmatic and artistic elements which have become unintelligible. The art of progress lies in preserving the eternal intact, whilst adopting an avant-garde, perhaps in some instances almost revolutionary, stance regarding those accidents subject to the empire. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.